In this section, we are going to concentrate on controllers. So far, we've returned a response to the user within the routes file as an anonymous function, which is fine for simple things, but in reality, most of your work will be done using controllers. Controllers organize your logic into single files. You can either have a single controller with a single method for each route, or, by far the most common usage, you have multiple methods for each action in a route. This might seem confusing at first, but not to worry, we'll go through this in this section. Let's kick things off by creating our first controller. Of course, we'll be doing this with Laravel's artisan command. Let's create a controller for a bunch of routes we are going to create for managing tickets. So let's enter PHP artisan make controller tickets controller -- resource. Now you might be wondering what -- resource does. Well, this creates boilerplate for our class for multiple common routes. This will be explained further, but let's have a quick look at that file. The first thing we want to look at is the index method. If we look in the documentation, we can see that each method matches an action. This is very common in building applications. You don't have to implement all these actions, just the ones you want. So for the index method, let's first create the reference in our routes file. There are a few ways you can do this, and I encourage you to read the documentation, but I'm going to show you the most obvious way, and in my experience, the most common way to add a route to a controller. Let's start by doing route get tickets, now our controller tickets controller, an @ sign which tells Laravel that index is our method name. So this tells Laravel when a user visits tickets, return the contents of the tickets controller index method. You do not need to supply the full controller's namespace, as Laravel will automatically look in the app http controllers folder for you. Great. So let's go to our controller and just return something very simple, like no tickets to view. If we view this in the browser, as expected, we get no tickets to view, which is fine, but what we really need is to have some buttons like create a ticket. We can do this by creating a view template. In Laravel, we display layout using template files and a syntax called blade. We'll cover more about templates later in the course, but for now, let's create a template called index.blade.php. All template files are located in the Resources Views folder. Let's get our template structure to match our routing structure. It's important to note that our template structure doesn't have to match the route structure, but in a lot of cases, it just makes sense to do so. Let's make the folder tickets and now the file index.blade.php. Now we've got a template file, let's make a simple form that will post to tickets create and the text no tickets to show at the bottom. Great, but let's not forget from an earlier video that we need to include our CSRF protection. Otherwise, Laravel will not allow the post request to enter the application. We can do this with the helper method CSRF field. So now we need to change our controller so that it no longer returns a text response and instead returns our template. Let's do that now. It's pretty easy to do. We use the helper method view. We specify the template we want to display. We can use the dot notation to separate directories and exclude the blade.php extension. Laravel is smart enough to figure this out for you. And finally, let's make the route that will be called when the user makes that form submission. As we are doing a post request, let's create it. Route post tickets create and add the controller and the method we want. Let's now also add names to these two routes. I'll call the first route tickets.show and the other one tickets.create. Let's jump to the method within the controller. Now at the moment, I just want to redirect the user when they click create back to the original page. We can do this using the named route. Return, redirect, route, tickets.show. Now when we visit the tickets page and click on the submit button, we get redirected back to the original page. This might be hard to see at first because it's so fast on our local machine, but if you watch carefully, you'll see the browser reload the page. In a real application, you'd probably want to grab what the user has submitted and create or update a database. We'll cover models and databases in a future video, but for now, this is good enough to understand controller methods. Make sure to keep these methods because when we do move on to models and databases, we'll be using these controllers and methods. As you can see from this video, you can create controllers and assign them to methods. One final thing I want to touch upon before moving on to the next video is the fact that you can just assign one controller to each route. Laravel calls this single action controllers. It's not commonly used, but it's important to know. If you wanted to use a controller, let's call it show profile, and have only one method point from the routes file, you would define an invoke method in the controller. And then within your routes file, simply reference the controller without the @action parameter. In the next video, we'll talk about dependency injection and adding middleware inside of your controller.